Chris Balas from the Wolverine.com. He's an expert on all things Michigan athletics. He's joining me here on Sayf at the Plate. Chris, it's great to have you here with us.
Clayton, always a pleasure, buddy.
So first of all, what a basketball season for John Beilein and his team, making it all the way to the national championship game, losing that game to Villanova, a team that looked better than Michigan at that time. Where do you have this program right now in terms of in the state, in the conference, and in the country, led by John Beilein in his 11th year?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Probably about a year and a half ago or so, people were calling for John Beilein's head after they lost at home to Ohio State, and we had some questions, you know. There were a couple seasons in there where they were riddled by injuries, and you thought, okay, you get to pass for those because there's no program in the country that's going to be able to overcome that. But then he had his team last year, and you thought, okay, this thing really needs to start picking up quickly. And guess what? They started to gel like John Beilein teams generally do at the end of the year. And now, if you look at the recruiting class they have coming in, what they've accomplished in the last couple of years, really in the last 6 years, when you look at that stat that there are no programs that have more NCAA tournament wins than Michigan in the last 6 years, that's remarkable given that John Beilein runs the cleanest program in the country. So when you got guys coming in like Ignas Brazdeikis from Canada, you've got David DeJulius, a point guard, Brandon Johns out of East Lansing to go with the guys that you have coming back. This program's on really, really solid footing going forward. I think you're going to see John Beilein probably extend his contract even a couple of more years because he likes this class so much and they've got so much to look forward to.
And coming into this season, this past season, it was the narrative was kind of a rebuilding year, and you had question marks at the point guard spot with Xavier Simpson, Eli Brooks, bringing in Deron Simmons. The ceiling of this team wasn't really determined early on in the season. Like you said, they kind of gelled towards the end of the year. But how did John Beilein exactly develop this team throughout the year? Because they were a vastly different team in March and April than they were in November.
Yeah, and he told us, right, when we were at these press conferences, he said, don't judge us by what you see in November and December. He said, you're going to know much more about us in March and in February. And it takes some time to see what he's got and what the best pieces are that work together. We always thought that this team was going to go as Charles Matthews went, the redshirt sophomore transfer out of Kentucky. And when he started struggling, they really picked it up, and they started winning games. They went on their 14-game winning streak or whatever it was there at the end of the year when he wasn't playing his best basketball. And even got benched at the start of the second half, I believe, against Penn State for Jordan Poole. So it's one of those things where guys get better, and he figures out who plays best together and what works best together. And what he found out with this team was they were going to win with defense. And they brought in Deron Simmons, and in my opinion, with the firm expectation that he would be the starting point guard by the end of the year. Xavier Simpson took it and ran with it because he was so good defensively, and that's how they were winning, that they couldn't afford to not have him on the floor. So it was really it was fun to watch the pieces come together, but it really started, in my opinion, with Mo Wagner. And talking to John Beilein a couple of weeks ago, he said, I was not pleased with where he was in the first half of the year. It looked like he was pressing, looked like he was auditioning for the NBA or whatever, and it wasn't the same kid that we'd seen at the end of last year. He really turned it up, became that all-around player, and they started excelling around him. So it was remarkable to watch. We had no illusions that this team was going to be able to make a run to the championship game, and yeah, they got some breaks with the seeding and everything else, with teams like North Carolina getting beat, but they took care of business, won a second Big Ten tournament, and again, just a marvelous coaching job by John Beilein.
Yeah, absolutely. You can only play who's in front of you, too. And
right.
Yeah, like I've heard you say, there's no apologies winning games in March. Now, all of college basketball, there's been, the storyline throughout the year with the FBI investigations and dirty recruiting, and Rick Pitino went down last year.
Yeah.
Was this matchup, Michigan against Villanova a couple of weeks ago on Monday night on the biggest stage, with John Beilein against Jay Wright, was that kind of a fitting matchup in your opinion?
Yeah, without question. And I haven't heard anything negative about Jay Wright on the recruiting trail. There are some of the obvious ones, and we won't name them, other than Pitino. Which was pretty clear. But when you see this, these guys have a lot of respect for each other going way back when they were both coaching at smaller schools in upstate New York, and you could tell the mutual respect that they had. Jay Wright just had a more talented team. Now, Michigan could hang with those guys if they brought their A game, but that's one thing that was kind of disappointing, Blake, was that Michigan didn't really find that groove that it had in the last probably 3-4 weeks of the regular season and going into the Big Ten tournament in the NCAA tournament. And if they played their A game, I think they could have hung with them. Who knows? Dante DiVincenzo went off, and they probably would have won anyway. But it would have been nice to see that be a more competitive game. But I think you're absolutely right that you look at this and you're like, okay, it would have been really, really fitting if this was the year that John Beilein got his first NCAA championship. But he's going to have a couple more opportunities, I think. And to see Jay Wright win it in the way that they did it, that's a team that's very similar to Michigan, plays a similar style. That's a good basketball team. So it was fun to watch, and it felt great to see that. Rather than like a Kentucky versus a North Carolina or something like that. I hope to see more of that going forward.
Absolutely. When you look at the Michigan basketball program, it's a program that's made the national championship game quite a bit, but they've lost quite a few of those games. What do you think the difference in legacy is for a team like the 2013 team, 2018 team, those Fab Five teams are, as opposed to the team that sealed the deal in 1989? Legacy for those players and the team overall. What's the difference of winning that one game?
That's a great question. It's so hard to win that last game and to win a national championship. And and I'll put it this way. Everybody's talking about Mo Wagner needed to come back for his senior year so he could win a national championship. There's no guarantee they'd go anywhere. That's the thing. It takes some good fortune. It takes a Jordan Poole shot against Houston, for example, in the round of 32 just to get to the Sweet 16. Michigan State was a loaded team that everybody said was going to win it this year. I think more people than just about anybody in the country picked Michigan State to win it. They didn't get out of the round of 32. Duke, with all of its unbelievable players, didn't make the Final Four, so there are no guarantees. So I think the legacy, when you look at 89, because that is the only team that ever won it, those guys are on a different plane just because they won it all. They got some of the breaks that they needed to win it all. And that's still the only Michigan team to have won it all. A lot of people don't understand or realize that Michigan's been to probably, other than 5 or 6 or 7 programs, I think Michigan's been to more NCAA championship games than anybody in the country. They just don't win them. They win the Final Four games. They just don't win the national championship games. But it's hard to do. Takes a couple of breaks, like we saw in 2013. I thought that team deserved better face, a better whistle. Probably would have won a championship. But when you look back and you see those Final Four banners hanging up there, when you accomplish that, you can't take that away from those guys. And I don't think that anybody looks at Fab Five, for example, and believes that they were a disappointment because they didn't win it all.
Absolutely. Mo Wagner heading to the NBA seems like kind of makes sense at this point in time after his junior season. Big year, and like you said, second half of the season and NCAA tournament was really, really good. Seems like the right choice for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think he was ready to go, and he had the itch, and that's been his dream. Excuse me. And, to stay for 3 years, this is a kid. People don't understand. Probably may be making millions of dollars overseas right now in Germany. He's that big of a figurehead over there where people really respect him and would love to see him play. But he wants to play in the NBA, and I think he's going to play in the NBA. I think next year you'll see him on a roster. I think he's going to continue to get better. He's that kind of a kid that has the work ethic where you're going to see him get better and better and better. And he might not ever be a star in the NBA, but I certainly think that you're going to see his game get to that level where he can be a contributor and certainly be one of those guys that sticks around the league for a while. So, this is a guy who gave every ounce of energy he had every time he went on the floor and went in practice. Time for him, in my opinion, to go and give it a shot. I do believe that he will go at the end of the first round. One of those teams, one of those really good teams, a Golden State or somebody like that, will take a chance on him, understanding that his best days are ahead of him. We talked to an NBA front office guy, as a matter of fact, who said the same thing, that if he's still around when they have a pick, they'll probably take him at the end of the first round. So it'll be fun to watch his NBA career, no doubt.
Going forward, looking at this team and especially going into next season, no Wagner, Evie Watson's moving on. What kind of team do you think this is going to be? Is it going to be top half of the Big Ten? Are they going to compete for the Big Ten? And what do you think the sights are set at going into next season? I know it's early.
Yeah, it is early, but and it's hard to say other than if you look at some of the pieces they have coming back, and we firmly expect Charles Matthews to come back after flirting with the NBA. He didn't sign with an agent. We do believe he'll come back for one more year. if you look at him and if you look at Xavier Simpson, who works harder than just about anybody in the Big Ten on his game during the summer, if he can improve his shot a little bit, this team's going to be every bit as good, in my opinion, as it was defensively. Probably better than last year because John Teskey's going to be playing probably 27 minutes, and he's a better defender than Mo Wagner. That's just a fact. If you watch what they did defensively when John Teskey was on the floor, it was harder for teams to score. And what he did against Isaac Haas against Purdue in the Big Ten championship game, for example, he made it hard for him. So I think Teskey's got another gear offensively, too. It's going to be interesting to see who gets the backup minutes at 5, if they go smaller, maybe an Isaiah Livers plays there a little bit more, maybe a true freshman, Colin Castleton, comes in, or maybe an Austin Davis, who had a great April a year ago before fading this year, elevates his game. You know, it's not unheard of that John Beilein players come on in their third year and really start to play well. But I think there are enough pieces there, in my opinion, with a guy like Jordan Poole having to take another step, that this team can be very good and can certainly contend in a Big Ten that's probably not going to be very strong again, if we're being honest here. It's going to be a balanced Big Ten. There are going to be a lot of teams. There aren't going to be any really bad teams, but there are going to be a lot of mediocre teams, and I think Michigan is certainly going to have a chance to finish in the top 3.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit and move on to Michigan football, wrapping up spring practice, and it didn't have a spring game there because of the inclement weather. But what kind of team are we looking at this fall? What kind of changes do you see from a year ago that was a pretty disappointing season at 8-4? You know, I know it's going to be a little bit different, you know, possibly with Shea Patterson there. Yesterday it came out, Pep Hamilton said that Harbaugh is going to be calling the plays. I don't think they were that far away from really being a good team last year when you look at the Wisconsin-Ohio State games, but I think they're closer than a lot of people think. What are your thoughts on kind of what they're going to look like this fall?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, they've got one side of the ball figured out, right? Defensively, they played well enough in almost every game with the exception of one to be undefeated, but you can't ask that much of your defense. You know, when you've got an offense that's turning the ball over and going 3 and out, and it was anemic offensively, 9 touchdown passes, the least amount since 1975. They needed a better passing game. And I've said this many times, but if you look, for example, at a team like San Francisco in the pros, you know, that last year they get their quarterback, and all of a sudden they're a different team. You know, I think if Shea Patterson's eligible, that changes the entire dynamic, assuming that the offensive line is just decent, and I think it will be under Ed Warner, the new offensive line coach. I think he's that good. I was talking to some Ohio State writers, and they said a lot of Ohio State fans were lamenting the fact that he's here because they know how good he is, and that's one thing that's been lacking for a decade now is good offensive line play. So I think if Patterson's eligible, I think that wide receiver core is just going to get better and better. Next year, I think it'll be one of the best in the country, and I think by the end of this year, it'll probably be one of the best in the Big Ten with Tariq Black, Donovan Peoples-Jones. So they just have to move the ball and be good. They don't have to be great, kind of like the 97 team, right? Where they were just good enough and not make the mistakes and put the defense in bad situations, get enough out of special teams that they aren't a liability. That team's going to be really good. Tough schedule, obviously. You got to go to Michigan State, you got to go to Notre Dame, you got to go to Ohio State, but this is a team that is good enough to beat anybody on the schedule, in my opinion, and has the talent to be a playoff team, like we were just talking about on the basketball end. It takes some breaks to get there, you know. For example, maybe a better call at Ohio State a couple of years ago on the spot, and they're in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens, but I certainly think that they've got the talent, and I think that Jim Harbaugh is rejuvenated and very anxious to prove that last year was just a fluke.
So you're going to France with the football team to cover them, Paris and Normandy. What are you most looking forward to doing over there while covering the team, and talk about kind of what kind of an experience this is for 18 to 22-year-old kids? I'm a 21-year-old who's never been to Europe and couldn't imagine going with a bunch of my best friends.
I'm a 40-something-year-old who's never been overseas, buddy. So it's kind of believe me, it's going to be a great trip, and I'm anxious to see how these kids embrace it. And, you know, I've been on Lansing radio shows and everything. Oh, it's just a recruiting trip and so on and so forth, where, you know, it's just an incentive to get kids to come. And I think it's more than that to Jim Harbaugh. And, you know, he went to Normandy a few years back and was blown away by the experience. You get goosebumps from what I understand when you're standing there. Kids your age, you know, so many kids your age who lost their lives there that he wanted to share that experience with them. And I think it's going to be a fantastic experience for those kids. I can't even imagine going over there that young and what some of these kids are going to be able to experience. So it's going to be fun to see how they react. We know that it was a great bonding experience for them last year. They won't be practicing there this year. I guess it was a logistical nightmare last year. They had to ship all the equipment overseas on ships and stuff like that, and figuring out how to get it over there. So it'll just be a good educational experience, and then as usual, some of these kids will be able to study abroad afterwards, which is an incredible experience for them. So I don't think there's any downside to this. I think it's fantastic, and I'm really excited to see how excited they get for it.
Awesome. Yeah, lots to look forward to. We'll be tuning in for your coverage there on the Wolverine.com. Chris Balas joining us here. Him and the staff at the Wolverine.com. No better place to follow Michigan football, basketball, and beyond, so check them out. Chris, it's a pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Always, brother. Take care, Clayton.
Thanks.